Hello and welcome to the Community Affairs Committee's program today, STC Community Budget Season Treasurer Meetup. My name is Anne Marie Queenie and I am the CAC Chair. On behalf of the CAC, thank you for joining us today. The CAC is excited to have the STC Board Treasurer, Bobbi Werner, and STC CEO, Liz Poland, host today's program. Bobbi and Liz will share information regarding this year's budget process, as well as important banking and IRS information that you will need to know for your community. The remainder of the time will be available for your questions and discussion. We have a large group attending today, so Aaron will place everyone on mute. And please enter your questions in the chat panel, and I will monitor the panel. And because we're going to have a brief presentation portion, we'll just hold all the questions till the presentation portion is over. And so as a reminder, this program will be recorded. And now it's my honor to turn the program over to STC Board Treasurer Bobbi Werner and STC CEO Liz Poland. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Yes, good. Thank you. Let me just share a little bit about myself. I was in your shoes just last year. Yes, I am the new STC Board Treasurer. I've been in this role for all of 4 months. So I am learning a lot about what goes on at the society level as far as budgeting and so forth is concerned. But I have been where you are. I served as treasurer of the Central New York chapter for years, and I understand the challenge of putting together those budget requests and the annual reports and everything that needs to be done. So I just want you to know that I identify with you and where you are right now. I appreciate the fact that Liz is here to share as well. She has some specific information that has not been covered previously. So, and she's also kind of a backup for me. I didn't tell her that, but since I'm new in this role, there may be some questions I don't quite know how to answer, but I will do my best. All right, so I'm trying to move this screen and it is not responding. There we go. All right, so our agenda for today, like I said, is, or as Anne indicated, we're gonna save our questions for the end. There's certain details that we are not going to go over because they were covered in the recording that we've sent you links to view yourselves. The walkthrough of the template has not changed apart from dates. So what Jim Bousquet shared last year applies to this year as well. If you haven't had a chance to play that yet, please do so because it will fill in some blanks and I think help you considerably when it comes to preparing your paperwork for this year. But we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the community funding process and some of the requirements. We're going to review some key dates related not only to the budget or the community funding schedule, but also tax filing. And again, some of this is going to reiterate what was in Jim's presentation, but it doesn't hurt to emphasize those again. Where Liz is going to share information is related to chapter bank accounts and EIN addresses. Then we'll share resources very quickly, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Okay, so let's get started. We think this will take 60 minutes or so. We'll see. So a lot of the detail on this slide, again, is a reiteration of what Jim has shared in the past. Everyone needs to understand that your budget forms that you submit constitute your funding request. And there are certain requirements, again, for receiving funding from the society. You need to complete your financial reporting. You need to file your tax forms. You need to meet your deadlines unless you arrange for some kind of an extension. So please pay close attention to the deadlines that we will review in a bit. This is the model that we use for distribution of funds to support chapters and SIGs. The pass-through is $15 per member of chapters and $5 per member of the community of practice. And there is no pass-through for communities of interest because there's not as much activity or reimbursable activities involved. Very often people question why the total funding to be a member of a chapter or a SIG is not passed through. And the note here is intended to explain that. It's essentially, understanding that there are overhead charges, there's work that goes on in the office that also supports our community. So it's not a 100% pass through, but it's a substantial one. The budgeting process, once you get your plans together for the year, you've done your review, you'll want to spend some time with your council working through some assessments of what worked in the past, what you might want to do in the future that's different. Certainly think about your associated costs and pull all of that together. Once you've done some of that work, it varies from council to council how involved the council members are in approval of a budget. Sometimes it's the treasurers alone who are doing a lot of that work, and you maybe circulate it to the council for their review and approval. Sometimes it's pretty much a nod and you submit it as is, but other times there are councils who are very actively engaged and want to make some recommendations for change. You need to work that out on your councils, figure out how it is the other members of your community council want to be involved. All of that work, though, will need to be done before you submit for a deadline. And if you foresee any risk at all of missing a deadline because you want to engage more of your council in feedback or changes, you need to let us know before the deadline that you need an extension. We very much encourage that kind of interaction and activity, but you need to keep in mind what the deadlines are for moving forward and submitting your budget. So once you submit the budget for review, and we'll give you instructions for doing that, you typically get a response within 3 to 6 weeks. Once all of the budgets come in, or once they start to roll in, the committee will meet, we'll work through them or review them in the order they arrive, and then try to make our decisions about them and get feedback back to the communities as soon as possible. So here we are with our key dates. The biggest one coming up, or the soonest one, is October 31st. And this is I made a change to make it the last day of the month. I know it's been in the 30th. It was on the 30th last year. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's a Sunday, a Friday, or whatever, but last day of the month to submit your budgets. If you foresee not getting it in by then, sometime ahead of the 31st, request an extension. So then usually somewhere around mid-November, the committee begins to start reviewing the budgets, as I noted before. Our goal is to have all of the budgets reviewed by the end of the year. There may be some exceptions to that if there were some extensions that force us to start reviewing some of the budgets in January. That's not unheard of. It has happened. But of course, we want to try to manage the flow of work and the review that needs to be done, and acknowledge the issues with holidays and so forth. The later we are reviewing these, I can imagine that will push out the sending out of checks, the funding to the communities. So better for everybody to get those in by deadline if you can. Even though we're not talking about taxes now, it's good to know the deadline for what's required of US chapters. May 15th is the deadline for filing either the 990N or the 990EZ And which of those two you file is based on the income in your community. So if you have any questions about that, that is detailed quite well in Jim's presentation. So review that if you need to. For Canadian chapters, I spoke with Jim about this yesterday. Jim, our former STC board treasurer, is still willing to advise anybody who needs direction on what to do to file tax forms in Canada. So very generous of him to offer himself for your consultation. So here's his contact information if you need to reach out to him. The other thing I wanted to say is that in addition to filing the tax forms, May 15th is also the deadline for your annual financial report, looking back at the previous year. So, and it says the 2021 annual financial report deadline because it's the report of calendar year 2021. Okay, even though you will file it on the in 2022. Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about bank accounts.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Bobbi. So a couple of questions have come up to me from different chapters who have their own bank accounts. And the question has been that in some cases, a treasurer has either decided to leave the position or the community has used a personal address for their bank and their bank account. And one of the recommendations I have is that we change, in as many cases as possible, the address for each of the chapters to the STC office address. I realize some banks may not be willing to do that because they're not in the same state as the STC office, but we have had a couple chapters do this already successfully. And that way, if anything happens to the community chapter treasurer, then we would have access to the bank records and the documents come here. I would also make a recommendation that every chapter has a co-signatory besides just the treasurer on the bank accounts. It can be very, very difficult to get access to a bank account if that person disappears or for some reason cannot sign the paperwork. You have to have a resolution of your committee, of your council. A bunch of paperwork has to be filled out. I've been through this myself, so I'm willing to co-sign if there's not someone else for a chapter who doesn't have a co-signatory. But I highly recommend having more than one. That makes the transition process a lot easier. And that's the idea behind both of these recommendations, is it's for continuity so that the chapter doesn't come to a screeching halt should something change in the council members. Next slide, please, Bobbi.
Mm-hmm.
The other recommendation I have is for your EINs when you file them. I get a list in the STC office of all of the EINs that are subordinates to STC, and that includes all of the chapters. And often I've noticed that there is a home address included on those as well. Again, in this situation, I would highly recommend that you change that address from your home address. If you have a PO box and you're paying for it, that's maybe different, but again, that's an expense you don't have to have. So I would recommend that you change it to the STC office address. You can even say care of me or Aaron, and that will help us get the reports on the communities should for some reason a treasurer not be able to continue to receive those. Anything that we get in the office related to bank accounts and or EINs, we will automatically scan to the treasurer so that you have a copy as well. We won't, forget to send them to you. You'll still have it. But I think that for continuity's sake, both of these suggestions have come up in the past year, and I think would be a good idea. We're not going to require this. Obviously, it's your convenience, but I wanted to make sure everyone understood that this is an option and definitely something that we recommend.
All right. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to just review some resources quickly. Here are some direct links. And again, these are in Jim's presentation. Direct links to the 99N filing, the 99EZ filing, some background information on the unrelated business income tax. If any of you fall into that category where you need to declare more income from other sources, like from advertising, for example. And then a link to the Treasurer Handbook, which I'm not sure if it has been updated since 2017, but I know it was on Jim's list of things to do as he was wrapping up his term. Additionally, we have all of the email addresses for folks that you need to know related to your community budget. Me as the board treasurer, Aaron as the membership and community relations director, Anne Marie Queenie, who introduced us today, the CAC chair, and Liz Poland, the CEO. I'm also happy to announce the new Slack channel. And when I say new, I mean that just this afternoon created a Slack channel for treasurers to raise questions, to share information related to community budgeting. It would just be a convenient place for us to exchange information and questions that we're not able to handle in this webinar. So at that, let's just open up the floor to questions. And Anne, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. I'm looking here, and all right, we do have one. Fatima asks, do communities of practice need to file tax forms and the annual financial report?
I know the answer to the first one, and that is no. It's only chapters who need to do the tax forms. Correct. I'm seeing Liz nod. That's correct, right? Annual financial report, I'm not as certain about that.
So communities of practice don't have bank accounts, so they don't have a need to file an annual financial report. They are not individual in corporations. They don't file an EIN either, so they don't need to do either. But if they are a community of practice and they want to get funding from STC's dues pass through, then they do need to fill out the budget paperwork.
Okay. And that's good for me to understand. So that, yes, the request for funding is based on filing the budget at the end of October or whatever extended deadline you might have. But no other paperwork is required thereafter, apart from requests for reimbursement and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And Lori had mentioned that she's thank you for the new Slack channel. So Bobbi, if you could say the Slack channel handle again, I'll put that in the chat panel. It's treasurers
and community budgets, I think. But if you do a search for treasurers, it should bring it up.
It'll come up. Great. And now we do have some more questions.
I think the community of practice paperwork, we're double checking the rollover amounts on those. So if you haven't gotten a budget document from Aaron Galilee yet, it's coming very soon. We're just double checking with the accountant that our numbers are right before we send them out.
Okay, and I think that was Fatima's question also. And we have a question here. When we submit the bank statement, should it be December 1st through December 31st, 2020, or January 1st through January 31st, 2021? And that's from Gian. Does someone want to answer that?
Well, it should be, you know, for when you submit the bank statement, that should be for the current year, the end of year. And that's only required, with your annual financial statement. Isn't that not correct? And that's
correct.
when you need to make sure that you provide the previous December end of year bank total.
Correct. In the spring.
So when you submit for this year, when you submit your annual financial report in May of 2022, you will submit your December bank statement, December 2021 bank statement that takes you through the end of 2021. because that's the year you're reporting on.
Correct. And if there was anything that was missed from the submission this past spring, that was I included that in your letter that you received recently saying these documents may be missing. So if anybody didn't provide a 990, their financial report or their end of year bank account, I requested that within the letter. That was just came out to chapters. So that'll be, we're looking for end of year 2020. If you got that note in your letter.
So you're talking about a missing item.
Yes.
From a previous report. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the one that we were collecting now is for end of year 2020.
Okay.
That I did some requests for.
Okay, thank you. And Christine has put in the Slack channel, the new Slack channel for treasurers and community budgets. So thank you for that. And while we're waiting for, I was just going to say, while we're waiting for another question, I have one, but I see another question's popped up. So is the activity, this is from Megali, and I believe Megali is with a student chapter. So is the activity report for things done in 2021 and the engagement plan is for 2022?
The answer to both is yes. So think of the report as reporting on what's happened before, and your engagement plan is for what you're hoping to do in the next year. So while I'm addressing that, I noticed a typo in the template I sent out for chapters, and I believe it's actually on the activity report tab, where I think it still says 2020 in the heading, but it's supposed to say 2021. So I wanted to make note of that and share it out with everybody. I'm just being totally transparent here. I missed one. I thought I got all of them, but I missed one. So, but the tab at the bottom is labeled 2021 and the engagement plan is labeled 2022.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, we're still, I'm looking here and Megali says thank you. So that question's been answered. As we wait for some more questions.
I see a question from Fatima asking about when you'll get the budget paperwork. So I don't know if this was a, if it was a mail out that didn't go out to you, or maybe was directed to someone else, or if you're new in your role and we didn't have your information. We did send out a mailing not too long ago, but if we missed you, if there's anyone on this call who did not get a letter telling you, where things currently stand, kind of a review of a lot of the deadlines that we've talked about, let us know and we will get that out to you along with the template that you need to use to fill out your budget request.
Bobbi, I also answered that. Part of the reason is because the communities of practice, because they have rollover funds, we were double checking those, and so those haven't gone out yet. And I think she was a community of practice. But yes, absolutely, to Bobbi's point, if you have not heard from us and you had expected to, because you are a community a community treasurer, then yes, please contact us and let us know that we've missed you somehow.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question. This is, okay. I'm just looking this a bit long. Do you have any suggestions on how we can go about accessing or transferring our bank account if our chapter leadership and executive body has completely changed? Do we contact the bank? From the 2019 bank statement, it seems it's a private account, not with STC head office. We do not have access as of now.
Megali, I'm curious what chapter you're with. I have had a couple of situations where the entire chapter's council changed and they transferred the account to me. So I do have some bank accounts that, I'm aware of. And yeah, I've already heard from your chapter president, Megali, and he knows that I have his account. Your account is with STC right now. So you're okay. There's nothing that needs to happen. I just need to write to him and find out who he wants to, where he's going to open a new bank account. Your bank account was closed completely. and the funds were transferred for STC to hold until the new council came on board. So now we just need to find out what you want to do. And that's something I wanted to bring up with everyone, is if for some reason you don't want to have your own chapter bank account, STC is fine with holding the funds for you and sending out reimbursement checks. That's how we do it with SIGs already. So if a chapter doesn't feel comfortable having their own bank account for whatever reason, that is an option. But Megali, I'll be in touch with you and Jason Tam, I believe, and we'll work through that with your bank.
Okay, thank you. Lynn Laurie says that she doesn't think she's been contacted. So I noted her name, and I'll email that to you.
Already been sent. Lynn, you should see it in your email.
Okay, great.
Great.
And okay, and Fatima says that yes, she is the treasurer for COP, and she's also just emailed Erin, so we have all the contact information set. Okay. Right.
You know, I'm still thinking about the challenge that was raised about, you know, having your entire council disappear, and what do you do? I'm sure there are some other communities out there that are in a similar situation. What do you do? I know for one of the chapters I was involved in, we had to show up in person at the bank, and we had to have, you know, a record of the meeting where, you know, we decided who was going to be in what role and who had signing authority. But we had past and present council members in that bank signing all of the paperwork. Whereas in another chapter, I know that there were cards that were sent around by mail, and we could sign them at our leisure and then just pass it along to the next person, which, you know, is just another situation and method for getting the same information. But I think there are more and more circumstances where you have to do this in person kind of signing because of all of the restrictions and the greater care that a lot of banks are taking just to make sure that we're handling these funds, especially for these nonprofits, that we're handling them properly. So, you know, and how that connects with you know, setting up something in the STC office and how that might help us to avoid some of these problems, I think is really an important consideration for a lot of our communities now, because we can find ourselves in a situation where we are not going to have access to funds unless someone has, you know, worked out some kind of an arrangement where there's this temporary hold someplace else, or if you can pull those other council members back in and somehow coordinate some kind of a transfer of signing power. I don't know, Liz, if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly happened where a chapter didn't have any council members that were reachable, and I had to help get involved. We had to have a meeting of the current council to explain to the bank. The bank has forms that address this issue. It's called, you know, a resolution of signatory, and you can work with them. But like you said, in a lot of cases, you have to be there present in person when this happens, and you have to have it notarized. So you also have to be looked at by someone, and so it can be a bit of a headache, and it can cost some money, because obviously a notary is going to cost too. So it's one of the reasons I recommended, if you feel comfortable with it, maybe having myself be a signatory on your account, especially if you already have, you know, a clear group of people who have access to the account. Putting one more person on is not as difficult as it is when no one is available, as you mentioned. So, and then, you know, it's come up a couple times where chapters have been going through a change, and it's been easier to shut down the account because the person involved was leaving, and move the funds to STC for safekeeping until the new council was there. I have not had a situation where funds were lost completely, at least not that I'm aware of. We've always been able to work it out. But banks are very strict about this due to fraud. So we have to, you know, anything we can do to help you guys make it easier so this doesn't happen is the hope.
Okay, thank you. Here's a different topic. And it says, what is the process for ordering STC pins for chapter officers and members? If it wasn't part of our 2021 budget submitted last year, can we? Oh, all right.
And I'll let Erin speak to it too, because she knows how many pins we have left. Those pins are getting kind of low in quantity. We have some that are left, but not, you know, the STC logo has changed since we had those ordered. So there may be some discussion about creating new pins. If you would email Erin and ask her what you're looking for, we can see if we even have them in stock still.
I think there's another theme that's embedded in that question, and it's the difference between a budget and a contract. You know, your budget is you know, your best guess of, you know, your plans for expending and taking in money in the next year. But if you opt to do something different and it's something that your council approves, I don't see an issue with doing that if it's not going to, you know, create financial difficulties for your community.
Okay, thank you, Bobbi.
Mhm.
And Megali also has a question, but you know, Megali, I think this is very specific to your chapter. So what we'll do is I'll forward that to Liz and to Bobbi after. So I think that would probably be the best approach.
Yeah.
So we will definitely
No.
get in touch with you.
Yeah, we have all of that, Megali, so we can work with you on that.
Okay. And then Richard has, we've never had a bank require notarization, but if they do, they should provide the notary. I guess that's just a comment.
That's been my experience with every time I had to go to a bank for any kind of signing, the notarization was done right there on the spot.
Okay.
But to piggyback on that, that also means you have to physically be there with your IDs. They're not going to allow that from a distance. So if your treasurer is not in the same town as the bank, that can be really kind of a headache.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And Lynn has just a comment, and maybe you'd like to add to this. It says, we actually closed our old account and opened a new account and needed our board meeting notes, plus our old treasurer, me as president, and the new, and the new treasurer. It wasn't hard, and we overthought it versus how easy it actually was. But it sounds like they did have all their information together.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you want to comment on the need for board meeting notes or.
That's absolutely necessary. In fact, it would be wise to contact your bank ahead of time and have them tell you the list of what they require in order to get this done in one visit. Because getting back to Central New York chapter, when we did our last transfer of signers, we had, I think there were 3 or 4 of us in the bank, and we all had to come with our IDs, and we had already forwarded the minutes of the meeting so that they knew that this was an officially approved change. But your bank representative will tell you exactly what's required so you can plan.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay. We have, can you briefly explain the terms 2020 actual, 2020 approved budget, 2021 approved budget, and 2022 budget request?
Yes, I can. So I'm going to start with the second item. 2020 approved budget. So what you submitted for 2020, if there were no changes recommended, that is what you submitted in October for 2020, for the following year for 2020. Your actual would be more like your annual report for your actual receipts and expenditures for 2020. 2021, the only information that you really have to work with when you're preparing your budget for 2022 is your approved budget. So what was your approved budget for 2021 or for this year? Okay. So, you know, you won't know all of your expenses for 2021 until you file your annual financial report in May of 2022. The 2022 budget request is the new information that you are requesting for this coming year. So, you know, it kind of works from left to right in terms of sequence, obviously, but the actual was, you can take that from your financial report for 2020.
Okay, thank you. And we're back on another topic. We have lots of topics. Fatima wants to know, speaking of pins, where on the website can we find STC goodies?
So many years ago, we used Cafepress for some of our branded type items, which is what I assume you're talking about. And I just checked, they still have a few, they have some mugs and a few other things. We don't really promote it because we haven't been keeping up with goodies. So maybe that's something we ought to think about doing, is getting some t-shirts and things together. It'd be fun. And I see Lori's comment about the meeting minutes. Sometimes every bank has a different form on this, but in general, I mean, we could provide something, but generally it's just stating that there was a meeting held and a vote that these people are the signatories on the bank was approved by the meeting council. And that's all it has to say, and a date. And usually it has to be signed by somebody on the council.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting, I think we'll have another question. But I guess while we're waiting, I just have a question. And I know that you've both gone over some information at the beginning, but you can feel free to choose what question you'd like to answer. One, because you look at these every year, are there any gotchas or things that are, you know, you see consistently over the years and you can tell people that, you know, watch out for these particular items? Or two, are there any particular tips that you can give our treasurers and presidents about submitting their budgets?
I know
Yeah,
one
I
of the
probably-
questions that comes up has to do with reserves. And I think that Jim's response to that question in the recording still applies. I agree with him that you know, you need to think about not developing this big bank account. You need to use your money to support your membership. And so how much is an appropriate amount of reserves to have in your bank account? And the metric that we tend to use is 1 to 2 times your expenses for the year. That if you're somewhere in that range, that's a comfortable range to be in. But then when your reserves fall below what your annual expenses are, then it begins to raise some question. And then we start looking at what sorts of income you're counting on from your programs, where you're expending money. And if it's out of balance, we might have to direct some attention to that or urge you to reconsider some things. Of course, if you are in the negative in your budget, we don't want you ever to have a negative total at the end. I mean, you need to think about a zero-based budget and possibly using up some reserves if you have a substantial amount that you've tucked away. But you know, if that reserve continues to grow and grow, understand that there's going to be a question about that. You know,
Okay, I think Bobbi's internet has just frozen. Unfortunately, she'll probably be back. But Liz, do you have something to add? Any gotchas that we need to watch out for?
Sure. So I see Lynn Laurie has mentioned that it's the budgets and the years that we just talked about. One of the things that makes it really easy for us to review the budgets is to have the prior year actuals and what was approved, so we can see if there's continuity in activity and what you've done, that you're keeping the same spending amount, etc., that you're doing the reserves 1 to 2 times of your expenses, that those things are the same. I've seen some really basic things that treasurers sometimes overlook, which is like putting your name at the top of the document so we know who submitted it. Everyone's disappearing on me, so I hope, can everyone still hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I can hear.
All of a sudden, I didn't have anybody on camera but me. So yeah, I think that those are some things. I see Isa Moyna's here. She might even have something to add to this, because she was our treasurer many years ago. And I think it was this budgeting model that you came up with at the board many years ago, correct?
That's right. That's right. It's been a number of years now, but yeah, it's essentially the same one that we've been using for the last several years. Yeah.
Yep. So as for other gotchas, let me think for a second. I think that some people miss the other tabs for activity and engagement reports. Those are somewhat new. We've only had those for the past year or two. And sometimes everybody's so interested in filling out the budget report that they miss those tabs. But again, it really helps fill out the information for us on what the community is doing and how active it is and how much funding is warranted to see that activity and to see what you're planning to do. So take those tabs seriously and really think about what you're planning to do in the next year so that we can make decisions on that. And I see Bobbi's coming back now.
I would say one thing that we encountered a lot last year with the budget submissions coming in is people forgot to put the name of their chapter on the top of the budget reports. So keep in mind that those are free fields to fill out, because when we're looking at them, sometimes we're looking at many in a day. So it's helpful to just remember to put like school, put your name at the top. That's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And Bobbi, I think you're back. So we were just discussing any tips that you have for the leaders to submit their budgets, or any gotchas that because you were a past treasurer also that you saw.
Yeah, and I know I was in the middle of this really grand explanation of something when my internet went down. So I don't want to repeat what was said already. But, I think I was starting to talk about my experience on the committee that was reviewing the community awards. And we had a question about that, because there are points that you earn by, having the right kinds of reserves. That you don't want them to be too great, but you want them to be appropriate. And, we were talking about the realities of the pandemic and how that really affected how a lot of communities could spend or not spend. You couldn't go anywhere to host an event. Everything was online, and that had a dramatic impact on a lot of communities and the way they had budgeted for their programs. And so, if you were unable to have a conference in the way that you had planned, but you had budgeted a sizable amount for that, and then you didn't spend it, what does that mean for your reserves? Well, those sorts of realities we had to take into account. And so, when you start talking about your activity report and your engagement plan, that really helps to provide the context that the committee will need to evaluate your budget request. And that all got kind of lost in the fog somewhere. And now you all got it. I hope it was as good as what I said to myself a little while ago. So
thank you, Bobbi. It was wonderful. So there's 2 questions that came in, and I think Mike had his answered. He said, if the treasurer is unavailable as the president, can he submit? And Liz said yes. So I just want to make sure Mike saw that information. And Christine has a question. What is an appropriate amount for reserves, and how much is considered a large reserve?
I started to talk about that before. I thought it was before I got cut off, but usually between 1 and 2 times your annual expenses. If you're in that ballpark or in that range, there's generally no question. If it's much higher than that, well, then you might get a little bit more scrutiny in terms of how you are spending money and supporting the members of your community. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong or it's inappropriate. You might have a good rationale for having a larger reserve. I think we get concerned when your reserves are insufficient to manage, that level of expenditure in the next year. I mean, if you show us a history of having, I'm going to use the same numbers that Jim did, $5,000 a year for 3 successive years, but you don't have that amount of reserve for what you are proposing in your budget, then what is the change in your plan? Are you going to be cutting back on programming, or what is the situation? So it's just, a reasonable yardstick, I think, 1 to 2 times your annual expenses, and in most cases that's going to be satisfactory.
Yeah, and Bobbi, just to add to that, I think one of the questions here is exactly what that dollar amount might be, and it differs. That's the complicated thing here, is some chapters have a lot of programming that they do, and so they have a larger expense budget. Others don't do quite as much, and they don't have as much in reserve. So it's going to depend on your community how much 1 to 2 times is. And I think that that's one of the things that people get confused about is, oh, I shouldn't have more than $5,000 in my bank account. That's not how we do the math in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the other telling thing is, what have you revealed about your plans for activities and serving your community? That's why those tabs were added to the annual budget forms or templates. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. Because there were cases where we had no context, and I say we, I wasn't evaluating them at the time, but the committee had no context to understand why the reserves were so high, or why there were so few activities, and just kind of wondering what was going on with this community. Are they serving their members appropriately? So those tabs help us to know what's going on, what your plans are, that you are making plans, first of all. And then you provide in your report, the activity report, history of what you've done, and that begins to fill in the gaps. And it's really important to help the committee to assess what's going on.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question. When a chapter officer resides outside the chapter geographic location, is it my understanding that they cannot be a bank signatory? Can you comment on this?
Sure.
I guess. And she goes, we're going through the process now.
Yeah, so Laurie, that's a situation that's pretty specific to each bank. If you're with a large banking organization, say Bank of America, for example, they're going to have branches in a lot of other cities besides just the city that the chapter resides in. So it's possible that if you have a larger bank branch, that your other co-signatory could go into a branch in their local city, in their local area, and also sign for the same corporation. In some of the smaller banks and some of the really like localized banks, that's not always going to be the case. And I mentioned that early on. This won't be a situation that every chapter can do, because maybe they've chosen a bank that was very local because it had lower fees or no fees. So I think it's just something to look into and see if it's a possibility. But I fully realize that there's some banks that may not allow that.
I think one of the other considerations is whether or not you have any international members of your council. There you will definitely run into issues with them having signatory rights. I know that was the case in STC Rochester, where we had one of our vice presidents who was in Canada, and she was not a signer.
Okay, thank you. I'm watching the time here, and it's gone quickly. It's right now it's 5 minutes to the top of the hour, and I'm just reading, someone had a comment. We chose a bank that doesn't charge us as we are a nonprofit. Just wanted to call that out. So thanks, Lynn. That is a good tip because those fees can add up.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, sure.
I know that the Central New York chapter moved from one bank to another precisely because of the fees. And so, you should shop around to see where you can get not only perhaps a more liberal signatory requirement, if that's important to your council, but also no fees. And there are plenty of those banks around.
I'll also add that having a co-signatory on your banking account really cuts down on fraud. I'm not saying that anyone's doing anything that they shouldn't be, but it's a good checks and balances that more than one person knows what's happening with the bank account and who has the ability to move funds around. For STC, for example, the business, I cannot be the only signatory on the bank account because the auditors wouldn't care for that. I know a lot of the chapters, because you don't have more than $50,000, you're not filling out a 990N, you're filling out an EZ, and there's not as much requirement for something like an audit. But it's another good reason to have another person signing on your bank account, just for the membership of your chapter knowing that you've taken that step against fraud.
Okay, good. Thank you. And like I said, we're getting close to the top of the hour. And so thank you very much, Liz and Bobbi. And if we do have a few moments though, so I don't know if either one of you would dislike to sum up anything or some key points that you didn't have an opportunity to answer.
I'm just going to bring my slide deck back up. And while I'm doing that, Liz, if you can just fill in the silence, I'll be right with you.
I'd be happy to. The recording will be sent out to everyone and probably also posted on the STC website or somewhere for the treasurers. We'll probably even put a post in the new Slack group that Bobbi created, which is great. Several people have direct messaged me during this meeting, and I just want to say that I will get back to you. You've asked me some specific things about your chapter or SIG in particular, and I saw them. I just didn't have time to write to you directly. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew I saw them and that we will get back to you on those things.
Okay, and we did have a quick question come in. So if you don't mind, Bobbi, I just want to bring this up from Jessica. Where is everyone saving treasurer files? Establishing a long-term location for the treasurer files. So
I know that the chapters I've been involved in have had a Google site that they, a drive that they set up with, limited access to certain people. So, of course, there are certain documents that you want to be available to your entire council, but you need to be really diligent about keeping that up to date, keeping the access privileges updated. I don't know if anyone else wants to toss in some additional information, but that's worked pretty well.
Yeah, I would make a recommendation too that you try not to use your personal email addresses. Again, this becomes a problem when someone on the council has to leave suddenly, potentially, and now we have no access to that person's Gmail account or any of their email or files. So I would recommend that you use like a very generic email address like treasurer@Chicago, so that as you pass things along to the next people, in a chapter or SIG, they have access to that too, and it's not your personal information. It's just a good idea, no matter what, not to use your personal information with any business anyway. Yeah, great. I think a lot of people are using the generic emails now, and I think that that's helpful. We do not have a centralized place for all of the chapters and SIGs to put their files. It's been really individualized for each community to make a decision, but I think into the Google Drive is one of the best ways. It's certainly the way we do business with the board, et cetera, and sharing files.
Well, if we're near the end, I
Yes.
certainly, I mean, the reason I wanted to put my slide deck back up is so that I could express thanks to everybody who volunteers in this role. It is, I think, one of the most involved roles in a lot of our chapters. I mean, you're the ones who are managing the funds and doing all this paperwork, and it's work that doesn't get enough recognition. So I personally want to say thank you for your work and for the work that you will be doing over the next several weeks to pull your budgets together, and promise that we will do our best to review them carefully and get you the feedback that you need in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you. And Liz,
I will
would you?
Yes, I'd also like to thank everyone. I know that this process can sometimes seem tedious, but it really does help us a lot to understand what communities are doing, and treasurers are essential to the process and to the council for each group. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for attending tonight and listening to us and asking such good questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you again, everyone, for attending, and we appreciate that. And thank you for all the work you do. And we'll stop the recording, and you all will receive, Erin will send you all a copy of this recording. Thank you very much.